To see you. Anyway, welcome to Hannity. Once again, your President Joe has thoroughly embarrassed the entire country on the world stage on his latest European adventure. Earlier today, he actually had to be led around and told where to stand by fellow world leaders numerous times, while repeatedly looking lost and dazed and confused during the ongoing NATO summit that has taken place in Lithuania. Unfortunately, the start of his trip was not much better either. Yesterday, he appeared to awkwardly use King Charles for balance, hanging on to him, and walk with noticeable stiffness, we'll call it. And later, he seemed to forget where he was, distracted in conversation with a British soldier, before having to be led away by King Charles. Move this way, Mr. President. Whatever. I can't do it like Pierce. Anyway, since becoming president, Joe's time in office has been nothing but one embarrassment after another. And, of course, the economy's in a shambles. World affairs couldn't be any worse than they are. And now Joe also skipped out on tonight's dinner with other NATO leaders, sending Secretary of State Tony Winkin Blinken in his place. That should give you all confidence, because according to officials, he has a big speech tomorrow and a 4-day work week, which is frankly too much for your weak, frail, cognitive mess of a president to handle. But in Joe's defense, he's coming off a very long, very stressful weekend. There's a lot of stress pulling that beach chair along the beaches of Delaware. And, of course, fighting with his beach chair at different moments. Look at that. He had a very hard time moving that beach chair, getting it in the right position, and, you know, bending over and everything. I mean, it was hard. Anyway, seizing an opportunity to capitalize on Biden's weakness, Virginia Governor, interestingly, Glenn Youngkin, he has now launched an effort we have talked at length about on this program, urging Republicans and conservatives in the Commonwealth of Virginia in this case, but every state he thinks needs to follow suit. Republicans must embrace early voting, mail-in voting, and match the efforts of Democrats in states where they have legal ballot harvesting. That is an imperative. Otherwise, Republicans will start out Election Day down hundreds of thousands of votes, and that is not sustainable for winning. And while Joe is embarrassing us abroad, we still have no answers on the White House cocaine mystery. It's now day 9. Earlier today, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was pressed on the issue, and as per usual, she had no answers. Take a look.
Do you have any updates on the investigation into the cocaine at the White House? The Secret Service indicated if they're closer to...
Yeah, I don't have any updates. As you know, as you just mentioned, Secret Service is under their purview. They're certainly investigating the situation. I just don't have anything updated. I would refer you to the Secret Service on that particular question.
Day 9 in the search for the Biden White House cocaine culprit, and we need answers now. It is now getting suspicious that we don't have them. The Secret Service is set to brief Congress on the scandal supposedly this week. What is taking so long? There's not very many people that have free access around the White House. I've been there. I know. Some law enforcement officials are now suggesting the person responsible may never be found. That is a stretch beyond any comprehension I would have. How would that be possible? How could a highly illegal drug that could have been tainted with fentanyl make its way all the way into the Biden White House with 0 suspects? Having been to the White House multiple times, I can assure you that you don't walk around as you feel free to walk around. There are Secret Service agents surrounding the building, inside every hall of that building, never mind the ones hiding on the roof and the ones in the basement. Yet we're supposed to believe that nobody knows anything. They can't figure out who was in what room at what time. They can't piece that together. Does the administration maybe know something that they're not telling us? Are they putting the Secret Service in a position that is compromised? Now, they certainly have struggled to keep their story straight. Remember, they first said that they couldn't tell us where exactly they found it. Then Karine Jean-Pierre angrily was lecturing reporters that the Bidens were not in the White House on that Friday before the weekend when they found it, calling the question, you know, highly irresponsible. You might remember.
Can you just say once and for all whether or not the cocaine belonged to the Biden family?
So, a couple of things there. We've answered this question, litigated this question for the last 2 days exhaustively. You know, there has been some irresponsible reporting about the family, and so I got to call that out here. And I have been very clear. I was clear 2 days ago when talking about this over and over again as I was being asked a question. As you know, and media outlets reported this, the Biden family was not here. They were not here. They were at Camp David. They were not here Friday. They were not here Saturday. They were not here Sunday. They were not even here Monday. They came back on Tuesday. So to ask that question is actually incredibly irresponsible. And I'll just leave it there.
Turns out Karine was the one incredibly irresponsible because what you just heard was a lie. According to the Pool report, the Bidens, in fact, were at the White House on Friday. They did not depart for Camp David until 6:34 exactly that Friday evening. Is the administration even taking it seriously? Well, certainly, you know, if it was the Trumps, this would be all you'd hear about on every network, in every newspaper, day in, day out, until they finally got an answer. According to the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, the White House has a rigorous drug testing policy. Really? How rigorous? Take a look.
Look, we have rigorous drug testing policies at the White House. We have rigorous drug use policies here at the White House. We take those extremely seriously. So we'll let the investigation unfold. If it involves someone from the White House, the appropriate consequences will ensue.
Apparently not that seriously. Assuming that's even true, then every member of the White House staff, they need to be drug tested. What if the cocaine was, as I said, laced with fentanyl, which is pouring into our southern border in record amounts under Biden's open border policies, not enforcing the laws of the land, picking and choosing which laws he chooses to enforce? You cannot have a potentially lethal drug around the president of this country. And make no mistake, we need answers. We need to know who brought it in there. We need to know who's responsible. And thinking that Hunter might be a possible suspect is a very reasonable thought. This should alarm every single American, and the White House needs to start taking it seriously. Here with reaction, Florida Senator Marco Rubio is with us. Senator, 9 days in. I'm sorry, that to me is in and of itself suspicious.
Well, it gives new meaning to the name White House, and I say that
it does indeed.
But yeah. Look, here, at any given time, if you asked the security people at the White House who was in the White House at 12:35 p.m., I'm just using that time on a Friday afternoon, okay, they can tell you every single person that goes in there is logged in, is logged out. They know where the president is at all times. They know where the family is at all times. So the idea that someone would walk into the White House with cocaine powder, drop it off somewhere, and they not know, or at least be able to narrow it down to the 25 people on the planet who were in that area or had access to that area during a defined period of time is ridiculous. It's absurd. It's just not true. That's the first problem. The second problem is, imagine right now if you are a Communist Party of China leader sitting in Beijing. Because you read and you watch the press. You see all of these things. So here's what you've seen over the weekend. Cocaine was found at the White House. Then the president, had this fight with a beach chair over there, and he just looked like he could barely move. Then he goes to London and embarrasses himself. And then the report tonight, and you add to that all the other things that have happened. Look, some of your viewers aren't going to like what I'm about to say, some of them anyways. On the human side, you feel bad for the guy. You do. It's not his fault that he's 80. It's not his fault. But you also have to acknowledge that our friends, our allies around the world see all of this, and their confidence is shaken about the person in charge. And our enemies see it too, like China, and they are emboldened by it. They will be emboldened by it. And this is very serious, but it is part of a much broader collection of things. And the last point I would make is, imagine if this was 4 or 5 years ago and the reports out where cocaine was found in the Trump White House. That is all we would hear about. That is all they would ask about. That is all I would be asked about in the hallways of the Capitol on a regular basis. Here, it's kind of like, we've moved on. Cocaine in the White House.
Let me ask you about the president. He's at this NATO summit, and I know there's a lot of talk in Europe about Ukraine and NATO, et cetera. But I want to ask you about China in particular, because I look at their record, Senator. No consequences for COVID, the spy balloon, confronting our Navy in international waters, confronting our fighter jets in international airways. No consequences for never-ending military threats on the continental U.S. with hypersonic missiles, never-ending threats against our ally Taiwan. Meanwhile, no consequences for intellectual property theft, currency manipulation, attempts to replace the U.S. dollar as the world currency. No consequences for unfair trade practices. Now we have a new axis of evil: China, Russia, Iran. And of course, we have Chinese nationals buying up thousands and thousands of acres of U.S. farmland, ranch land, and land near military installations. I would imagine, Senator, I couldn't go over to China and buy their farmland, their ranch land, or land near their military installations. Can you tell me why this is the Biden foreign policy, to let China run roughshod over us and create really dangerous alliances?
You know, because the Biden foreign policy, and to be fair, there's still people in the Republican Party that somewhat believe in all this, is constructed on the basis of this belief that somehow, you know, China and the United States are going to be able to work this all out. Look, nobody wants a war here. But what we can't forget and what we can't ignore is the fundamental fact that China intends to be the world's most powerful country. They believe that's the trajectory they're on. They believe that's their rightful place. They're very confident of that. And that's what they're moving towards. Now, they would like to avoid any conflicts or controversies in the short term because they think that might impede their rise. But they are very confident in their rise. And they believe America is a hollowed out power, a decadent power, a collapsing power, and that all they need to do is continue to grow and allow us to self-destruct. And there's just way too many people still in American government who are products of 20 and 30 years of policy failure. The same policy failure that saw millions of American jobs and factories completely leave this country, go to China. We have single-handedly built or helped the Chinese build their middle class at the expense of ours, their working class at the expense of ours.
I know you're on the Foreign Affairs Committee and you're really involved in foreign affairs. There's been a lot of articles lately about UFOs. I know this question is a little out there. Is there any truth to any of this?
Well, we don't know. All I've said is we have people that have very high clearances, both today and in the past, who did really important work for our government or continue to do important work for the government, who have come forward with some claims about the U.S. having in the past recovered exotic materials and then reverse engineered those materials to make advances in our own defenses and technologies. That's the claim they make. Now, I don't know if those claims are true or not. What I do know is that one of two things is happening here. Either they're telling the truth, and that is something that obviously would be the biggest story in human history, or we have people in really important positions of government who are crazy and who are out there making up stories and who are still in positions of importance. Either one is a big problem. So we've got to figure out which one of these two it is, because the second one in particular would be very troubling. But we don't. All we know is claims that people have made. These are credible people that have done and continue to do important work for the country. And by law, we're required when they come forward as whistleblowers to take their claims seriously and to investigate them. But we just don't know. That's the answer.
Senator Marco Rubio, great to see you. Thank you, sir. All right, tonight our two-tiered justice system is alive and well under Biden's DOJ, but Republicans, they are now fighting back. Texas Senator Ted Cruz, he's calling for a special counsel to investigate the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, for what he says is obstruction of justice and perjury. Senator Cruz joins us now with more. We have the House investigation into whether the DOJ has been weaponized. I don't believe we have equal justice or equal application of our laws at this point in our country's history. Senator, tell us what has alarmed you, and why would you ever think that Merrick Garland would appoint a special counsel to investigate himself?
Well, Sean, you're absolutely right that there's a two-tiered system of justice. This Department of Justice, this FBI, is the most politicized Department of Justice and FBI we have ever seen. You mentioned the House. The House is doing a terrific job. I had lunch today with James Comer. He and Jim Jordan together are doing a fantastic job of trying to hold the Biden administration to account. The House is the only body of Congress doing its job because Senate Democrats don't want to know the truth. They're not interested. But here's where we are on the facts. We now have two credible whistleblowers, both IRS career employees, who've come forward at enormous risk to their own careers, to their own livelihoods, And they've reported on corruption within the Department of Justice, specifically that Merrick Garland and his political appointees repeatedly interfered in the investigation of Hunter Biden, and especially that what they did is they protected the White House. They protected the big guy. They said no questions about the big guy. You're not allowed to investigate the big guy. Not only that, they alleged that the Department of Justice tipped off Hunter Biden's lawyers before they executed a search warrant, before they tried to question Hunter Biden repeatedly. They allege the senior officials at the Department of Justice obstructed this investigation. Now, we don't know if these whistleblowers are telling the truth. But if they are, if they're telling the truth, their testimony is flatly contradictory with what Merrick Garland has said under oath. I questioned Merrick Garland in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he told the Judiciary Committee under oath that the U.S. attorney investigating Hunter Biden had complete authority to investigate and that there was zero political interference. His statement is directly contrary to what the whistleblower said. The House needs to have a hearing. They need to have both whistleblowers under oath. They need to have David Weiss, the U.S. attorney, under oath, and they need to have Merrick Garland, the attorney general, under oath. Somebody's lying, and if Garland's lying, he committed lying under oath to Congress, which is a felony, and he committed obstruction of justice, which is a felony. He obviously can't investigate himself. So Merrick Garland should be recused from the entire matter, and the Department of Justice should appoint a special counsel to determine whether or not the Attorney General of the United States has committed multiple felonies.
With the honor and integrity to do it, and I'd like to get to the bottom of the 1023 form, but we're talking also about 6 whistleblowers, and my understanding is that tomorrow, John Solomon, investigative reporter, editor-in-chief at justthenews.com, he will be on this show. He has a document. In that document, it'll show the recommendation to, in fact, indict Hunter Biden on tax charges, felony charges, dealing with the years that have now passed the statute of limitations. If that ends up being true, would that mean that Mr. Weiss didn't do his job?
Well, it would, and what the IRS whistleblowers also alleged is that Mr. Weiss tried to get the U.S. attorney in the Central District of California and the U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia to bring charges against Hunter Biden for the most serious tax offenses. The cases had to be brought in D.C. and California because that's where the crimes occurred. And what the IRS whistleblowers alleged is those U.S. attorneys refused to bring the case. And to be clear, one of those U.S. attorneys was a political donor to Joe Biden. Another of those U.S. attorneys was a political donor to Kamala Harris. And their allegations, again, are directly contrary to what Merrick Garland has said under oath. And this is something I've talked about at great length on my podcast, Verdict with Ted Cruz. You look at these whistleblowers, both of them are career IRS employees. One, Gary Shapley, was a senior supervisory agent with a lot of experience. He has no reason that's evident on the record to lie. He doesn't appear to be a Republican. The other whistleblower, he's self-described as a gay Democrat with a man for a husband. There's no reason to think he's got an axe to grind with Joe Biden, and yet he's got the courage to call this out. We need a special counsel because the Attorney General is not above the law, and neither is Joe Biden.
Senator, I hope you keep your foot on the gas. I agree completely. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. The state of California are even nuttier than we thought. The San Francisco Chronicle has just published a major investigation of the illegal drug trade in the city. And get this, according to the report, Honduran drug dealers are making so much money in the city of San Francisco that they are using the proceeds to build elaborate mansions back home, often decorated with the logos of Bay Area teams. One Honduran woman telling the paper that it's even become popular for locals to get a neck tattoo of the Golden Gate Bridge. So why San Francisco? Well, because it's allegedly the easiest place to sell drugs, and the Chronicle reports that the city has a whopping 6% conviction rate for drug charges. Plus, of course, it's a sanctuary city. As one drug dealer told the paper, quote, in San Francisco, it's like you're here in Honduras. You go to jail, you come out. Now, of course, the flood of drugs into the country would not be possible, of course, without Joe Biden's wide-open southern border and, of course, California's sanctuary state status and San Francisco's sanctuary city status. Instead of doing anything about any of this, well, Team Biden announced new plans to try and reduce the number of deaths from fentanyl and the street drug now that is sweeping the country, destroying lives. It's known as tranq, but only about 15% is their reduction goal, and mostly through further research, not through enforcement. Now, today, Sarah Carter spoke to residents in San Francisco about the drugs that have taken over the streets. Take a look.
When you hear President Biden right now saying, look, I'm going to try to get a handle on this new drug that's on the street, but we're looking at it only being reduced by 15% by 2025. I mean, do you feel like this is just theater, like they're really not doing what they need to do?
I think they're putting on a show for us. Yeah, they're putting on a show to prolong the effect, and because it's out of hand, and they know it.
People don't care about their jobs. They lose interest in their families. They lose interest in life. It's all fentanyl, and like there's people that like they'd sell their entire life for that, and it's crazy.
We need to change. If we're going to be prosperous, we need to change. Can we undo what has occurred? Yes, it'll take time.
President Biden and the administration tackle the problem with fentanyl and xylazine, what they call the street drug crock, the one that makes people look like zombies. But we're only going to do it, we probably can reduce it by 15% by 2025. Do you think that's enough?
Not really, but something is better than nothing.
I've been here almost 13 years, and I've seen nothing but degradation going on since the day I got here.
All right, Fox investigative reporter Sarah Carter joins us now with more. It really is that bad, and there's certain areas, by the way, 1 mile from Nancy Pelosi's house in one direction, 1 mile from her office in another direction, people defecating in the street, urinating in the street, shooting up in the street, needles everywhere. We have shown those videos, and we have done exclusive reports in the past. It's getting worse, not better?
It's getting worse, Sean, and I got to tell you, some areas, now there are some residents, we've spoken to them, that are grateful that at least in recent months, the mayor and others, especially with more law enforcement around Union Square, have seen the area clean up, particularly around Union Square, where they have more tourists, where more people are visiting. But just outside of Union Square, Sean, I mean, I couldn't even walk down some of the sidewalks. People were shooting up drugs. They were smoking crack. They were using fentanyl. As we looked around the streets, I got to tell you, it was gut-wrenching. It was like watching a war zone. There were some drug dealers on the streets openly selling drugs near police officers. People were not being arrested. You could see why the situation is so out of control. And in fact, Sean, just down the street from my hotel, right there in Union Square, the Gucci store, there was an armed robbery yesterday. So while we were out filming, there was an armed robbery at the Gucci store yesterday. The police are still investigating that. You can imagine how horrifying that was for the customers inside. But think about this, Sean. There is a 40% increase in deaths, in overdose deaths here in San Francisco just between January and March. That increase alone is shocking. And San Francisco, in all reality, Sean, is a microcosm, really, of what is happening across the country because of the lax border laws. We see in Honduras, they're building mansions. They're doing this where we've reported from, in Guatemala, in other areas of Central America where drug dealers have a hold on our country because nobody is getting prosecuted. And even worse than that, say intelligence officials that I'm talking to, is that our adversaries like China and others are taking advantage of this situation, creating an effective proxy war in the United States against our own people. The tragedy here is that it's not just urban cities like San Francisco that are feeling the effects of this, but it's happening not just here, but in rural communities, in small towns all across America, and frankly, sadly enough, in many of the communities that our viewers are watching us from right now. if it doesn't
Sarah.
get fixed, it's going to get far worse, and I don't want to know what that's going to be like.
It'll get worse, and there'll be a lot
Sean?
more dead Americans, as if we don't have enough dying as it is. Sarah Carter, thank you for that report. Here with reaction, former senior advisor to President Trump, Stephen Miller, back with us. Well, I mean, if you leave the borders wide open and China's selling most of the fentanyl and distributing it so it comes across that southern border, this is nothing but a predictable result. Stephen Miller.
Not only is it a predictable result, it was predicted. During the presidential transition, border agents warned this administration what would happen if they removed the Trump policies. This has all been thoroughly documented. The chief of Border Patrol for the first 6 months of the Biden administration wrote a letter to Congress documenting how Joe Biden and his deputies were painstakingly warned that if you remove the Trump policies, the gates of hell will open up on that southern border. But they did it anyways, because the Democrat Party wants maximum illegal immigration into this country. And all of the Americans who are dying as a result of that and dying from these drugs are simply the casualties that this administration is willing to pay in order to have their open borders agenda.
Okay, so we have the drug issue because Joe picks and chooses what laws he wants to enforce, and apparently has gotten away with it, continues to get away with it. By the end of this year, Joe Biden, as president, will have in 3 years allowed somewhere around 7.5 and 8 million illegal immigrants into this country. We don't vet them. We don't know if they have radical backgrounds or associations. In the middle of a pandemic, there was no health check, and that means they financially become a burden on the American people because we're paying for food, water, housing, education, health care. Those that get in the criminal justice system, we're paying for that as well. And by the way, one recently released criminal just went out and raped a young girl, Stephen.
Yes, and that's going to happen and continue to happen as long as this administration guts ICE and ICE enforcement. Deportations are down 70%, even as illegal immigration is at the highest level recorded in American history. So you have more illegal immigrants than ever before, and you have the lowest deportations on record since ICE was created. Because ICE officers are being ordered to release even dangerous criminals. And I know this because I speak to my former contacts who are still inside of DHS. And as you mentioned, Sean, taxpayers are picking up the tab for prison.
كذلك السميد نزيد نطويها طية تانية ونزيد كذلك نضيف لها الزيت والسميد يعني حتى نكمل نطبق كامل هذيك الحبة. إذا هنايا بعد ما كملتها راح نحطها على جنب ترتاح مدة 5 دقائق ونزيد نعمل معاكم حبة أخرى.